courtroom fell silent as every eye turned to Sarah Dawson, a single mother seated at the defendant's table. Across the room, Philip Grant, a smug lawyer in a polished suit, smirked, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your Honor, I fail to see why we're entertaining this nonsense," he said, flipping through his sleek leather briefcase. "Clearly, Ms. Dawson lacks the knowledge, resources, and, if I may say, even the basic competence to defend herself today." A few chuckles rippled through the audience. Philip adjusted his tie, casting a smug glance toward Sarah, as if to say, "This is too easy." But then, Sarah stood, her voice cut through the tension like a blade, confident and sharp. "Objection, Your Honor." The judge raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds, Ms. Dawson?" "On the grounds that Mr. Grant just made my case for me," she replied, locking eyes with him. For the first time, his smirk faltered. The courtroom began to buzz with murmurs. Even the judge leaned forward, intrigued. "You think I lack resources, Mr. Grant?" Sarah continued. "Funny you should say that, because the resources I've gathered over the past 2 months include evidence that your client forged documents, manipulated contracts, and violated federal law. I'm sure the IRS would be quite interested in hearing about it." The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Philip's smug demeanor dissolved into a stunned silence, his mouth opening but no words coming out. 2 months ago, Sarah Dawson would have never imagined herself standing in court, facing off against a seasoned lawyer like Philip Grant. As a single mother living in New York, her life was already a constant struggle. Sarah juggled 2 jobs to provide for her 7-year-old son, Ethan, in their modest Brooklyn apartment. The rent was overdue, the fridge was nearly empty, and her future seemed like an endless cycle of hardships. One evening, after finishing a long shift at the diner, she found a legal notice in her mailbox. Notice of lawsuit. The words sent a chill down her spine. Her landlord accused her of causing significant damages to the apartment, demanding thousands of dollars she didn't have. At first, Sarah thought it was a mistake. She called the management office repeatedly, but her calls went unanswered. When she showed up in person, the receptionist handed her a business card with the name, Philip Grant, attorney at law. Sarah felt trapped. Philip wasn't just any lawyer. He was one of New York's best, infamous for never losing a case. "What can a single mom like me do against someone like him?" she murmured to herself. That night, as Ethan walked into the kitchen holding a crayon drawing, Sarah couldn't help but smile. "What's this, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "It's you, Mommy," Ethan said, pointing to the drawing of a woman wearing a crown and holding a giant trophy. "You're the best and you can win anything." Sarah hugged Ethan tightly, tears threatening to spill. "Anything, huh?" she whispered. In that moment, she made a decision. She wasn't going to let the system crush her. She didn't have money for a lawyer, but she had something far more important: determination. After deciding to defend herself, Sarah Dawson embarked on a grueling journey to prepare for the trial. Every night, after Ethan was sound asleep, she spent hours at the kitchen table, poring over law books borrowed from the public library. At first, the librarians looked at her with skepticism, but as they saw her determination, they became her biggest supporters. One of them even remarked, "You're really doing this, huh? I've never seen anyone so determined before." Sarah simply smiled. "I have to, for Ethan." She began by carefully reviewing the landlord's documents. It was in these papers that she found her first major breakthrough. The date of the alleged damages was 6 months before she even moved into the apartment. But she didn't stop there. Sarah filed a motion to delay the trial, giving herself more time to gather additional evidence. Over the next few weeks, she uncovered more discrepancies in the landlord's claims. Many repair invoices didn't match the maintenance logs, and some of the so-called completed repairs had never been done at all. Sarah didn't do this alone. A neighbor volunteered to watch Ethan so she could spend time filing court paperwork. A retired paralegal, hearing her story through a mutual friend, offered to review her legal documents, and a local journalist guided her on how to dig through public records for evidence. One night, Sarah received an anonymous email from a former tenant of the same landlord. The tenant provided invoices and photos proving they, too, had been falsely accused of causing damages. Sarah quickly contacted them and persuaded them to testify. By the day of the trial, Sarah was no longer a frightened single mother. She had built a rock-solid case, ready to face off against Philip Grant. On the first day of the trial, Sarah Dawson walked into the courtroom with a confidence she hadn't believed she could muster. Meanwhile, her opponent, Philip Grant, maintained his usual air of smugness. He strode into the room with the calm assurance of someone who believed he had already won. From the very beginning, Philip worked to undermine Sarah. He objected to her questions at every turn, dismissed the evidence she presented, and tried to make her appear unprepared. Yet, Sarah held her ground. Murmured Dawson. Philip sneered. "Do you really think you're competent enough to understand these documents?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I don't think. I know I am." The jury seemed sympathetic to Sarah, but sympathy alone wouldn't win the case. She needed something big, something undeniable to shift the scales in her favor. That's when Sarah noticed a small but critical detail in one of the documents Philip had submitted. A forged signature on a contract allegedly signed by her. Her heart raced as the implications became clear. "Your Honor," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady, "I'd like to point out that the signature on this document is not mine." The room froze as whispers began to spread like wildfire. Philip immediately stood, trying to regain control. "Are you accusing my client of forgery?" Sarah didn't flinch, her heart pounding. "I'm not accusing anyone, but the evidence will speak for itself." The judge ordered the contract to be examined by an independent expert. When the results came back confirming the forgery, the courtroom erupted into gasps and whispers. Philip, who had been composed until now, looked completely rattled. He scrambled to object, but the judge dismissed his efforts with a sharp wave of her hand. Sarah stood at her table, feeling a surge of pride. This was the first major turning point, and she knew she was ready for the battles still to come. The following days in court grew even more intense, as Philip Grant made every attempt to regain control. He introduced a surprise witness, John Reynolds, a contractor who claimed to have repaired the damages in Sarah's apartment. "Mr. Reynolds," Philip said with his usual confidence, "can you confirm that the damages in the apartment were caused by Ms. Dawson?" "Yes," Reynolds replied firmly. "I personally repaired all the damage, from the ruined floors to the broken windows." Sarah immediately stood. "Your Honor, I object. This witness was not disclosed beforehand and his testimony lacks supporting documentation." The judge allowed the testimony but instructed Reynolds to provide evidence to support his claims. When it was Sarah's turn to cross-examine, she approached Reynolds with a calm but piercing gaze. "Mr. Reynolds, do you typically keep invoices and receipts for the repairs you perform?" "Of course," Reynolds answered confidently. "Then why didn't you bring them today?" Reynolds hesitated. "I wasn't asked to." Sarah tilted her head, offering a faint smile. "How unusual, especially since you're testifying in a major legal case." She continued, "Can you also explain why, in the photos your client submitted, the timestamps show they were taken after I had already moved out?" Reynolds froze, his face turning pale. He stammered, unable to form a coherent response. Philip immediately stood to object, his voice louder than usual, but the damage had been done. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, the jury exchanging skeptical glances. "No further questions, Your Honor," Sarah said, returning to her seat with a confident smile. The judge, after reviewing the evidence, dismissed Reynolds' testimony and warned Philip that the court would not tolerate any further misconduct. Philip didn't give up. He attempted to introduce additional last-minute documents, but Sarah was prepared. She presented a statement from a former employee of Philip's who had exposed his pattern of using false witnesses in other cases. "Your Honor," Sarah said, "this evidence not only discredits the testimony, but also highlights a pattern of fraudulent behavior by Mr. Grant and his client." The judge banged her gavel sharply, declaring that no further fraudulent actions would be allowed. Philip looked as though his confidence had been entirely drained, and Sarah knew she had gained the upper hand. On the final day of the trial, Sarah Dawson could feel the tension hanging heavy in the courtroom. She sat at her table, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her files, but her gaze was steady and unwavering. Across the room, Philip Grant whispered frantically to his client, his once confident demeanor now replaced with visible unease. When the jury returned after hours of deliberation, silence blanketed the room. Sarah took a deep breath, her heart pounding in anticipation. The judge asked the foreperson to deliver the verdict. In the case of Jacobs v. Dawson, we find in favor of the defendant, Ms. Sarah Dawson. The courtroom erupted in whispers and relieved sighs. Sarah closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She had done it. The judge continued, her tone stern. This court finds that the plaintiff and his attorney engaged in dishonest conduct during these proceedings, including the submission of falsified evidence. Such behavior is unacceptable in our justice system. I will be filing a formal complaint with the Bar Association to initiate an investigation into Mr. Philip Grant's actions. Philip's face turned pale. He lowered his head, saying nothing, while his client silently exited the courtroom, disappointment etched on his face. Sarah watched them leave, a sense of relief washing over her. But as she turned to the jury and saw their appreciative gazes, she realized this wasn't just her victory. It was a testament to the power of truth and justice. As Sarah stepped into the courthouse hallway, she spotted her son Ethan waiting for her. The moment he saw her, he ran toward her, his small arms wrapping tightly around her waist. "You did it, Mom, didn't you?" he asked, his voice filled with excitement. Sarah knelt down and hugged him tightly. "Yes, sweetheart, I did it." Ethan beamed up at her. "I knew you would. You're my superhero." David Stern, the journalist who had supported Sarah, approached, handing her a thick folder. "This is everything we've got on Philip Grant and his clients. I think this is just the beginning." Sarah accepted the folder, her sense of determination reigniting. She smiled. "Let's make sure he can never hurt anyone else again." In the days following the trial, Sarah Dawson finally felt the peace she had longed for over the past several months. She spent precious time with her son Ethan, baking cookies, playing games, and enjoying the relief of no longer having to prepare for court battles or deal with legal paperwork. Yet deep down, Sarah knew her work wasn't finished. In her hands was a folder provided by David Stern, the journalist who had supported her. The documents not only exposed the misconduct in her case, but also linked Philip Grant to a series of fraudulent lawsuits, false witnesses, and unethical practices. A week after the trial, Sarah and David met with Claire Andrews, a federal prosecutor. Claire, sharp and focused, listened intently to Sarah's story while carefully reviewing the evidence. "What we have here is substantial," Claire said, flipping through the files. "If even half of this is true, Philip Grant will lose his license and could face significant prison time." Sarah nodded. "I want to make sure he can't hurt anyone else." With Sarah's cooperation, a comprehensive investigation was launched. Other victims began to come forward, sharing similar stories of coercion, intimidation, and manipulation by Philip Grant and his clients. When Philip's case went to trial, Sarah testified with strength and composure, recounting her experience. After a brief trial, the jury found Philip Grant guilty on multiple charges, leading to his disbarment and a lengthy prison sentence. Months later, Sarah stood in her kitchen preparing dinner with Ethan. The smell of spaghetti sauce filled their small but cozy apartment. "Mom," Ethan asked suddenly, his small voice tinged with worry, "is that bad man ever coming back?" Sarah knelt to meet her son's gaze, her heart aching at his concern. "No, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice firm. "And if anyone ever tries to hurt us again, I'll be ready, just like I was before." She kissed his forehead, her determination shining brighter than ever. Ethan beamed. "Because you're the strongest, bravest mom in the world." Sarah laughed, pulling her son into a hug. The hardships were behind them, but the lessons and strength she had gained would stay with her forever. Sarah Dawson's story is a powerful and inspiring reminder of resilience and the power of truth. It shows us that no matter who you are or where you come from, you have the ability to stand up against injustice and come out victorious. But Sarah's experience isn't unique. There are so many people out there, perhaps even you or someone you know, facing challenges that feel impossible to overcome. That's why we want to invite you to share your own story. Have you ever faced injustice? Was there a time when you felt cornered but managed to find the strength to stand up and fight back? We'd love to hear about it. Share your story in the comments below. No matter how big or small, every story matters. What you share might not only be a way to express yourself, but could also be the beacon of hope someone else needs. Your experiences and lessons could be the inspiration someone is looking for to navigate their own struggles. If you found Sarah's journey meaningful and inspiring, don't forget to hit the like button to let us know you connected with it. And please, share this video with your family, friends, or anyone who might need some encouragement today. Together we can create a community where truth, courage, and justice are celebrated. Sarah's story is just the beginning. With your help, we can spread this message even further. Thank you for watching, and we can't wait to read your inspiring stories in the comments below.